used to. That's typically the case. Anyways, let's go back to the late 1700s and in London, where the economy was kind of growing, booming, and as that was happening, the population was too. So they needed to find a way to get their supplies or their goods to the seagoing ships on the river Thames. There's this vast series of canals and locks were built through the city to bring the goods to the Thames using small canal boats. Okay, this is very, very relevant to the story. I'm just trying to set it up for you. Those canals, in case you were wondering, still exist today, but they are not used for trade anymore. It's just a peaceful place for people that walk or run or boat, cyclists and tourists. It's just completely different use. But is it Regent's Canal? I'm going to call it Regent, probably. It's pronounced differently, but this canal was built in the year 1812 and is still one of the most beautiful canals of London. It stretches over 8 miles from Paddington to the Thames and encircles the heart of the city. And the canal banks are very popular and typically busy. On an afternoon in February of 2001, now back to kind of modern day, 2 boys were fishing in this canal, and one of their lines was caught on something on the bottom of the canal. And I know that's one of the things that when you let your kids go fishing by themselves, it's kind of scary to think about this, because children are not as scared as adults of, getting into some kind of an accident. But these boys ended up they reeled in the line, and in this case, it was okay for them. But they found that it had snagged a duffel bag. They could see that. So, boys being boys, decided to drag the bag to the edge of the canal. But it was too heavy and they needed help getting it into the bank. So, in the end, being curious, the boys unzipped the bag to find that it was filled with bricks and ceramic tiles. But there was also something wrapped tightly in plastic. And when they opened it, the stench of decomposition was overwhelming. So that's when they called the London police, who confirmed that this was a human body part. Police were sent in to dredge the canal, and divers found 5 additional duffel bags, each of them filled with bricks and each containing more 6 bags and 10 body parts. The torso had been cut in half. The legs were cut at the hips and the knees. The arms were cut at the shoulders and elbows. The head, hands, and feet were all missing. They took it for an autopsy, and they figured that this was a female. There wasn't much forensic evidence available, really. But in the end, they found blood work to the lab, and through DNA, they were able to find out who she was. She was in the system for drug offenses and prostitution. Her name was Paula Fields. She was 31 years old, mother of 3, and she was originally from Liverpool. She moved to London looking for a better life, but she became addicted to crack cocaine and turned to prostitution, and social services had taken her children away from her. Police found that Paula had been dating a man. His name was Joe Johnson, and this was 4 months earlier. But Joe Johnson, he was kind of a ghost. There was no record of him. But they did find his roommate, Tony Sweeney. And he had a lengthy police record. Tony's brother, John, also had a record. And he had been wanted for attempted murder of his girlfriend in the year 1994. Before long, police realized that Joe Johnson was actually the fugitive John Sweeney. The soil on the bricks that were used to weigh down the duffel bags was shown to have come from the garden where they lived, the Sweeneys. But that wasn't enough evidence to convict him for the murder of Paula. John Sweeney had been on the run from police for almost 7 years, using different names wherever he went. He was working as a carpenter on a construction site in central London when he was finally arrested on March 23rd, the year 2001. This guy was a master in disguise. You can see him from long hair, short hair, added fake hair, glasses, no glasses, kind of a reddish tint to his hair, kind of blonde hair. You name it, he tried it to disguise himself. He was arrested in the year 1994 for attempted murder of his former girlfriend, Delia Balmer. But the police didn't have enough evidence to convict him, so at the time of his arrest in the year 2001, Delia Balmer was still living in London and working as a nurse. So let me tell you a little bit more about Delia and John. Delia had met John Sweeney in London, what they call it, a pub, in the year 1991. They dated and traveled throughout Europe together, and they decided to settle down in London, and they got this apartment relationship kind of changed, and John became increasingly aggressive and possessive. And by 1994, Delia had decided it was time to end the relationship and change the locks on their home. But he wasn't happy with that. So when she came back from work one day, he followed her, and as she opened the door, he ran behind her, pushed her through the door, and held her captive for 7 full days. During that time, he tied her to the bed. He beat her, raped her, threatened her. I mean, you name it. But when Delia's friends from work came to her house, they knew someone was inside. But nobody would come to the door. So they called the police. When they arrived, John Sweeney had Delia open the door ever so slightly while he was hiding behind the door. The police could tell that something was terribly wrong and forced the door open. Delia ran out of the door and into the street while police pushed their way in and arrested John Sweeney on November 14th, 1994 for assault, rape, and unlawful confinement. Inside, they found evidence that John had plans to kill Delia and dispose of her body. He had a murder kit with plastic ground sheeting, orange rubber gloves, rolls of tape, a saw, a bow, knife, and a box cutter knife. Delia told the police that while John had tied her up, he told her he had murdered his prior girlfriend, Melissa, in Amsterdam. He said that she was an American, and he walked in on her having sex with 2 German men. He told her that he shot Melissa 3 times. Well, he actually shot the 3 of them too, and sat with their bodies for several days, then decided to dismember them and dump them in the canals of Amsterdam. So he told Delia that if she wasn't a good girl, that's how she would end up. Inside the apartment, the police also found several firearms and hundreds of paintings and poetry that John Sweeney had created. Both the artwork and the poetry were violent, dark, and graphic, with blood everywhere, dismembered bodies, women being tortured. I mean, the poetry seemed to be a confession of his mayhem, really. One poem read, "Chop her up in bits, food to feed the fish. Amsterdam was the pits." What a poem. I don't know what's poetic about that, but I'm sure somebody could find that poetic. Police at this point suspected that he was a serial killer and had murdered at least one other girl in the same way that Paula Fields was murdered. London police contacted Amsterdam police, but they had no record of the murder matching their inquiry. Unfortunately, John Sweeney was released on bail after only a month in jail for assault on Delia. And Delia Palmer was not notified of his release, which, how you don't. Under the term of his bail, he was not to go near Delia, but that didn't stop him really, because within hours of his release, he was hiding near Delia's door again, waiting for her to return home from work. As she approached her front door, Sweeney savagely attacked her with a knife and an axe, slashing her chest and cutting off one of her fingers. Luckily, a neighbor heard her screams, grabbed a baseball bat, and hit him across the back with it. John Sweeney ran from the scene, and Delia barely escaped with her life. Both of her arms were broken. Her lung was punctured, and her chest was permanently scarred. So that's why he was on the run, using several aliases, and remained undetected, really, by the authorities, until his arrest again in the year 2001, when Paula's body was found. Police didn't have enough evidence to prove that John Sweeney had dumped Paula's body in the canal. They had enough to get him into prison while they searched for more evidence, so that's what they did. Eventually, he was sentenced to serve 9 years in prison for the attempted murder of Delia. And also, he got some other charges for firearms. So, this gave enough time for the police to continue to search and find more evidence in Paula's case. The Amsterdam authorities really couldn't help much. But they did, however, have a report of an American girl named Melissa Halstead that was reported missing in April 1990 by her family. That's all they got. But it matched what the police knew about John Sweeney. Melissa, the American, was considered a rebellious young American girl that had dated John Sweeney in the late 80s. She worked as a model for Ford Modeling in New York, but ended up moving to London and took up photography. Now, the relationship between Melissa and John was frequently violent, and they were always arguing. It was bad. There is this one occasion where he threw a chair at her with, I don't know how he did it, or, the way, or the really, but it scarred her face permanently. In Melissa being a model, that's kind of messed things up for her. But she always seemed to forgive him. In the year 1988, Melissa was deported from the United Kingdom for working without a permit. She then left John Sweeney and moved to Vienna, Austria. But John Sweeney followed her, broke into the apartment that she was sharing with her roommate, tied up her roommate, and searched the apartment for evidence that she had another lover. Later that day, he hunted her down and beat her with a claw hammer. John Sweeney was in jail for 6 months for the attack, but despite the abuse, Melissa again stayed with this guy. and they ended up moving around Europe quite a few times, really, but ultimately settled in Amsterdam. The relationship was still the same. It was abusive. They were always arguing, and Melissa told her sister Chance O'Hara, quote, "If I ever go missing, John Sweeney has killed me." End quote. The most recent photo that police found in his belongings, John Sweeney's belongings, was from April 13, 1990, which is right about the same time that Melissa's family last heard from her. He was sent to prison in the year 2002. Temporary arrangement. He would be eligible for parole soon and potentially could be on the street before they found more evidence on the Melissa, Halstead, or Paula Fields case. This is such a, terrible story where there's a terrible guy doing terrible things and he is able to get out of jail so easy that really it's unbelievable. In the year 2004, the death of Paula really became a cold case. In the year 2007, 6 years after Paula's Fields, body parts were found. The London police got a call from the Rotterdam Cold Case Investigation Team. They were investigating all of their unsolved cases from 1990 onward. On May 3rd, 1990, Rotterdam police had pulled several duffel bags from the Western Single Canal in Rotterdam. And like Paula Fields, the bags had been weighted down with bricks and contained several dismembered body parts. From a female, head, hands, and feet were missing. The Rotterdam team had already spoken to the police in Amsterdam and suspected they were the remains of Melissa Halstead, who was reported missing just 1 month before Rotterdam had found the body parts. My puppy's eating a blanket. By January 2008, just as time was running out and Sweeney was about to be eligible for parole, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, and London police worked together to exhume the remains of the unidentified body parts from the year 1990. Using the DNA of her relatives, 18 years after she had been reported missing, Dutch detectives confirmed the dismembering girl was in fact Melissa Halstead. She's fighting with a little bird on the window. Though there was no real forensic evidence against John Sweeney, the similarities in the cases were all too familiar. So on April 26, 2009, he was removed from his cell and interviewed. He was officially charged with the murders of both Paula Fields and Melissa Halstead, but he made no comment. During the trial, prosecutors showed the jury his artwork and poetry that were very incriminating. Over 200 images was an image of Melissa Halstead. Next to her head was a tombstone. I mean, I would say that's kind of enough. The tombstone read, "Rip, Melissa Halstead, born 7/12/56, and died," and it doesn't say a date. Another one of his painting was a self-portrait where he had a bloody axe tucked into his belt. And just to make things worse, while he was in prison, he created many more additional paintings with dismembered women bodies cut in the same way as Paula and Melissa were. I mean, you can even find this online. During this trial, he often yelled at the prosecution, arguing that his paintings were random and nonsense and very abstract. He claimed that many were made while he was tripping on LSDs and weren't meant to be taken as a confession. But you can't argue with the jury. They found this very real. And they took his confessions of the murders. So after 10 hours of deliberation, the jury came back with a guilty verdict. On April 5th of the year 2011, he was sentenced to a whole life tariff, whatever. That's how they call it there, which means that he would spend the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of parole. It was kind of a rare sentence in the UK anyways, because they have less than 100 prisoners serving a whole, life with a possibility of parole kind of thing. But police believe that he was responsible of several more girls that vanished, like a Brazilian girl named Irani, a Colombian girl by the name of Maria, a nurse from Derbyshire, England, by the name of Sue. And during his time in prison, he described them as some of his 30 to 40 girlfriends that police have not been able to locate. So in the end, after he was found guilty, he kind of confessed that he was in fact a serial killer, and that he did in fact have more victims. Those wind chimes always scare me when it's complete silence and then all of a sudden they start going. Especially at the end of the video with this kind of confession from a serial killer. It is believed that all the murders were done because of some kind of jealousy, which, so what, right? I mean, really, it doesn't matter what fueled this guy to commit those horrible murders. But it was also said that for a serial killer, really, it's a need. It's something that they want to do. It's a very sad case. And the fishing trip of those boys was what really condemned this guy. What brought attention to him after he was hiding from what he did to his ex-girlfriend. I have to admit that sometimes as you learn about cases in different countries, and you find these sentences or this guy that you know that did something terrible, like he did, kidnap this ex-girlfriend, held her captive, raped her, tortured her, and planned to kill her, and yet that wasn't enough to put him away for the rest of his life or for many, many years to come. And that he was able to walk away from it. It's just one of those things that it really breaks my heart to think that if he was stopped earlier, maybe this wouldn't have happened. Such a terrible case, and in my opinion, avoidable case. I am not going to argue with anybody about what is right and what is not right, about sentences and about, this kind of domestic violence. And I mean, this is not even domestic violence. I don't think it qualifies when you hold somebody captive and you rape, and at least he should have been put away for rape. But this is what happens when it's like a couple that broke up, and sometimes the lines are not really straight, or they're not really defined, or not. So it's such a horrible story that could have ended way before if things would have been handled differently. Now, do I think that here in the States we have the perfect justice system? No, I don't. So that's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is that sometimes the law seems to protect criminals without even wanting to do it. You know what I mean? I understand that the authorities must be frustrated to the point that it's, beyond belief to release somebody that they knew that did something to this horrible to an ex-girlfriend. So I think it's not an authority problem. I don't think it's a person problem. I think that in this kind of cases we need to find something that we can hold on to. And I think in this case it should have been the rape charges and put him away for a long time, so he wouldn't get to this new victim. So the canal killer, it all started in the 1700s with a series of canals that he chose to use as dispose grounds for him and really his victims. Mental illness, it is possible. Those art and poems, and I find them creepy and a little bit disturbing. But let me know what you think about this case, please, in the comments down below. Thank you so much for being here today. If you missed last Patreon upload, is the unicorn among beast. It's a Hawaii case that was very, very known. I hate to say popular, but known. So make sure you check out that video that I already shared. Thank you so much for being here today. I truly appreciate it. And I'll talk to you guys next time.